on these, so any interest for any of these is probably long since gone out the window, but I'm going to go ahead and do them anyway for the sake of completion. So, we're actually going to start with the Meg, which I was a little worried about at first because it kind of came off, particularly the marketing, like the posters and stuff like that, where they really seemed to be embracing the idea of how ridiculous it sounded to have Jason Statham fighting a giant prehistoric shark. And they were just going to go all out with that, so they had, you know, like trailers playing with Beyond the Sea. And they had posters that had like the mouth opening underneath the beach and the title was opening wide and stuff like that. And it felt like we were getting a little too close to Sharknado territory, which is an absolutely awful place to be, which would have been the worst direction for them to go. But thankfully, it doesn't, at least to me anyway, it didn't seem to have that self-awareness in the sense of that it was too in danger of being, not only too in danger of being that close, but it wasn't like, not as self-aware as it kind of looked like it was going to be in general. It's jokey, but it's not exactly the thing I feared it would be, which would be the whole, basically doing the whole meme thing and like intentionally doing these really outrageous things just to see how dumb they could go, but the fact that they were in on the joke would make it seem less bad than it actually was. It didn't seem like it came off that way, which was a huge relief to me the more it started to go. Though I did hear that I guess Jason Statham was a little displeased with the overall outcome for the simple fact that I guess it was supposed to be, I don't know if they actually shot this stuff or if this was a pre-production thing, but it was intended to be like a lot gorier and more like R-rated than it was, instead of doing the whole PG-13 thing, because when you look at it, despite the number of human deaths in the movie, which isn't honestly that big, it's practically bloodless in that sense. All the blood and gore comes from fish eating other fish, pretty much. And I can totally get where he's coming from there, because you do see stuff like when they find the boat of the dudes that were cutting the fins off sharks and making soup and stuff like that, and they just find like a single severed arm that just looks like a random prop that was laying around the set or something. And you get a sense, like, you feel like something was really cut down. And then there's the stuff, like, like when you get to the climax, the whole beach scene, and you sort of get this sense that there was an opportunity to, like, fully go all out, sort of, in the tradition of the 2010 Piranha movie. I don't know that any movie needs to go that extreme, but this movie could have. Like, the potential was there. And honestly, it's fine. I can understand how it might seem like a better movie if they were able to go all out, but it's honestly, that scene itself, I'm not as forgiving to the entire movie, but that scene itself actually seemed fine the way it was. We still had, like, those big shots. It didn't look fake. It looked like there were actually, like, a ton of extras there. And just those really big shots actually sort of work for the climax that we got. And they do eventually do the whole thing where we don't see the shark. They do the whole Jaws setup where it's, for a while, it's sort of like point of view shots, or it's suggested what might be there, but we don't know what's actually causing all the havoc. And that's somewhat well done also. The main reveal that they do with the squid was actually kind of clever, the way they set it up, like there's one big threat, but obviously we know in the sea there's always going to be a bigger threat, so the way that they played with that was kind of nice, but it is, like, for the most part, the fact that they're not showing anything does also, it makes kind of the first half of the movie feel like really redundant, because it's just the characters going through, like, narrow escape after narrow escape from an unseen enemy of sorts. And even when the shark does end up showing his face finally, it does feel like there's a lot of mundane stuff, surprisingly, in a movie like this. Probably a lot more than you're expecting. Which I kind of started to anticipate when I saw the length. It was like, no way they keep this up for an hour and 53 minutes. It's probably got like a slow start or something. And yeah, that is the case, but the problem is that with that build-up, like the whole not seeing the shark right away, it being like this unseen force for a while there, it seems appealing on paper, but the trouble is while we're waiting for it to get to the big stuff that we know is eventually coming, we gotta deal with these really, really dull-ass characters, and they try to kind of liven up these scenes with, like, these really cool, like, underwater shots and seeing, like, these underwater, like, stations that they work in and all that. And some really, good and good-looking stuff, but these characters are kind of really bringing it down. Well, I would have assumed that Rainn Wilson was our comedy relief. I think he's supposed to be, but I wasn't really getting that vibe from what because he's one of those characters. He's the dude that comes in and basically owns everything. He's like the rich dude that's here for seemingly no reason, and he's like completely and totally worthless through 99% of his screen time. He's just there to make these cracks occasionally that, once again, I think are supposed to be funny, but they just don't land. Which is a shame because Rainn Wilson is like great in almost every other aspect, but for some reason these lines were just not working. I think just in general this character is just kind of off because he's also sort of like this somewhat antagonist. And while we get the sense that he is the greedy rich guy throughout it, he only really becomes sort of like really shady and antagonistic in like the last few minutes of his screen time. And it seems sort of abrupt because we start off with scenes where he's like trying to, speak Chinese to these people, but he's like failing at it. And then they just kind of stand in an awkward silence for a while, and this is this movie's idea of the comedy that we're leading up to. So that was really alarming considering how early that scene is. It's like one of the first scenes after the opening. And so when you gather that this is going to be a movie that sort of wants to have a sense of humor about itself, and this is the comedy we start with, you get really scared. You get really worried about what might be coming. So this is the kind of movie where people think it's funny to say the word insertion because it's like sex. We get jokes like that. And these are all like in the beginning too. And it also doesn't help that these characters in particular, the insertion guys, once they get attacked and they get trapped down there in the little sub that they're in or whatever, we start to realize that the movie actually kind of wants us to take the characters, like, seriously. Like, they want to have, like, actual emotional stakes here. Once again, I don't quite know if this is the movie for that, despite the fact that it's not, like I said, it's not as self-aware as it might come off in the marketing, but still, it does feel a little too jokey about itself and a little too over the top for this to really work. If like it can't like half-ass its way there. It can't just sort of do like one scene or have one character give like one sad look and that'll be enough. Like if you wanted us to care about these characters, you were gonna need to try a little harder than they did, despite the fact that it's clear they like legit wanted us to. And yes, something was just not gelling here at all. And you also have the friendship between Jason Statham and Cliff Curtis, which it seems like it could work. Like, these are definitely actors that are capable of making that work, but once again, it's the material that just feels... It's just... Yeah, just anything involving character development here is so flat, and once again, if you haven't seen it, you're probably thinking, what does character development matter in a movie that looks like this? When they spend the entire first half of the movie on it, I think they really do want you to care at least a little bit. And I don't know if that's, like, I don't know if that's the start of the problem or not. Because, like, I don't know whether to suggest it just go all out and be the over-the-top crazy movie it looks like on the surface, or to encourage it to do the character thing just better. It's this weird middle ground the movie kind of tries to reach between its first half and its second half, and it's... Because we don't really get a whole lot of that over-the-top stuff in the first half. We do get, like, some cool shots, like I said, like there was the moment when the giant glass window gets bit by the shark, and then to give you the idea of like just the whole mass of the situation, a whale comes by and we see how small the whale looks in the outline of the teeth marks. And stuff like that is really cool, but it's kind of few and far between in this sort of first half when it seems so weirdly character focused. Ruby Rose is also one of the human characters, and I don't really think any more or less of her than I have before, so you know that bar is kind of already low as an actress. So, yeah, she's there, basically. That's really all I can... Whether I was a fan or not, that's all I could really say anyway. She's there, I guess. um, and then, if there's one thing that actually does work, apart from the obvious... obviously Statham has always worked really well as this action leading man. Like, he just has just the right amount of charisma and just the right amount of just that badass attitude, but he can also be sort of light and comedic when he needs to be and really make it work. Like, as far as his talent goes, I think he's actually quite underrated with just how much he can pull off, and how well he can carry a movie almost single-handedly. But also what works here is his interaction with this little girl. That might seem something to sort of like shoot in just for like a cuteness factor or whatever. But it's surprisingly kind of nice between them, and that's probably the closest we get to like really caring about a character's relationship with another in this movie. So there is that. Everything else is like the sincerity is kind of killed by everything surrounding it, and even so, just the whole delivery of it is just not really working. So, and it doesn't help that it feels a bit uneven in regards to how we're supposed to feel about certain characters, like how there are two characters that seem to be equals throughout the movie, and then one of them is killed. And it's like, now to be fair, it could be because this person was the first person killed, but it still felt uneven when this happened. When one of these characters is killed, it's like a really big deal to everyone. Like, this is like a movie-stopping tragedy for everybody. And then the other dude is killed, and it's maybe mentioned once or twice. And it just kind of, it happens very abruptly, and life goes on rather quickly. I think maybe 2 minutes after this dude dies, there's like a joke between the characters that were mourning, and it's... I don't know. So yeah, we're trying to do that balance instead of just kind of doing one or the other is... It just really kind of makes the first half of the movie a huge drag. And in a movie like this, with this kind of setup, you should have very little drag, but this movie has, like, a lot of it. A lot more than it should. But that's not to say there aren't good things about it. Once it does decide to go big and crazy, once again, maybe not as big and crazy as you're expecting, but I do kind of like that too, though, that, like I was talking about the Sharknado thing, how it didn't seem like it was trying to do the biggest, most outrageous thing possible. It really just kind of pretty much stands by what it introduces from the start. It doesn't really try to build into something, like, really big, because when you see the damn shark, it kind of starts off big. Like, you're just sort of the movie is immediately as outrageous as it's gonna be once the whole thing is introduced. And for this type of movie, that probably works better, especially after we've seen so many movies try to do this whole, you know, let's see if we can out-dumb the movies that were behind us sort of thing. So I did actually like that it didn't seem like it was trying to go bigger and bigger and dumber on purpose. So, maybe in some cases they probably maybe did unintentionally, I don't know, but as far as I can remember, yeah, it pretty much stayed consistent with that, so that was good. And then, every now and then there's actually a good line, too, like, when Statham's had to deal with, like, 2 tragedies at this point that resulted in death, and his response to somebody else who's doing this for the first time is, it's not easy being the person who survives. and just kind of in the context of that scene and just the way he says it is like that's a good line, especially even in a movie like this. Stuff like that can still work. So, but yeah, it does get, you know, yeah, it does eventually turn into the movie you at least expect it to be when you go in. If maybe not, you know, something as, you know, big and dumb or whatever, but um, yeah, I mean, yeah, it does have stuff like Statham swimming out towards the shark, trying to put a tracker on it, and to basically calm himself, he's singing Dory's "Just Keep Swimming" song to himself. So, you know, stuff like that. But honestly, that stuff even feels like it doesn't even feel like the movie being intentionally ridiculous. It feels almost like it's within Statham's character to do that. Quite honestly, I know it's weird making defenses like that towards a movie like this, but like I said, I don't think the movie is as big and dumb as people might be expecting it to be. I think they're gonna. Some people may even be let down if they haven't been already. I know it's been out for like 5 days already, but I haven't heard like anything really. So I don't know what the actual reaction is. But yeah, so I imagine some people might be let down that it's not big and dumb enough. But maybe that is the case in the more dull parts where they actually try character development. But yeah, I kind of like that it didn't try too hard, but still, that doesn't change the fact that a lot of the movie is a drag too, and the jokes oftentimes fall very flat. So that's yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that one. So it's okay. I feel like it's something like I feel like it's a movie I'm going to see again at some point, if that tells you anything. So like it's one of those movies where like I feel critical of it now, but I'll probably like loosen up on it as time goes on. The more I think about it, and should I see it again, which is probably likely. So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what time does to it, I suppose. So yeah, we were sort of semi-critical of that, but semi-forgiving as well. Let's just not be forgiving at all. Let's talk about Slender Man. This is like Slender Man is a movie that seems like it was totally and completely made strictly for those crowds I was talking about. Like when stuff like Hereditary comes out, and you have those crowds, those young crowds, like the teenage demographic, and they seem just hell-bent on letting everybody know that they don't think this movie's scary. Like, it's so not scary. It's when it tries to be scary, it's actually funny. Well, when they say that about Slender Man, they're probably not lying this time. Uh, so, because you talk about being out of ideas for movies, particularly in the horror genre, and so it's like when you're resorting to like decade-old internet memes, where it's what is it? When they're reading it and they say like basically the outcome is an exact quote: "You're messed up forever." That's the big threat. Is if he finds you, you'll be messed up forever. Somebody thought this was worth making a horror movie about. And so it's like, and you hear all about like how horror seems to be there seems to be kind of a new leaf for horror getting more critical acclaim than it usually does, with stuff like The Babadook and It Follows and Hereditary, The Witch, and all that stuff. But I guess you could even throw A Quiet Place in there. But for every one of those, there's like 90 of these. And there's plenty that fall into the middle ground that are not great and not this, but I feel like we get a lot of these too. So the movies like Slender Man are the reason that horror has the bad reputation that it does, at least from a critical standpoint, and is considered like a lower genre. It's not for the the more acclaimed movies. It's not even for those middle ground movies. It's strictly movies like this single-handedly bringing horror down in a lot of people's eyes. And it's my understanding that, despite the fact that this seems like a property that Hollywood has come to out of desperation, I was thinking I heard somewhere that Slender Man's shown up in like one or two straight-to-DVD movies or something. I think Doug Jones might have played him once. But the thing here is that And you would also probably think there's a bit of an immoral stance here, given the real life shit that's happened because of this, where like stupid kids are going out there and like hurting others because of whatever the hell this is. And even despite that, you would think there could possibly be like an effective basis for this. Like obvious, even using like the whole sort of real life angle that this is something that's gotten so out of control that it's done that. But I mean, obviously, as touchy as that would be, I feel like there's got to be somebody that's like really, really talented out there that could probably make something like this work, even with that coming into play. But, I mean, obviously, it was also going to lead to this predictably shit and lazy product. And, honestly, the most predictable thing about this movie being shit is not even the fact that it's based off a fucking internet meme that's, like, almost 10 years old. It doesn't feel like it's based on a concept that's, like, just kids trying to scare other kids. No. What drew my attention to how shitty this was going to be was the director's name. This is the guy that made, as far as his horror stuff goes, this is the guy that made I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer, the straight-to-DVD sequel to that franchise, that trilogy, I guess. And I don't know if you guys saw it, I'm going to assume not, but I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer has got to be one of the worst straight-to-DVD sequels ever made. Maybe even one of the worst horror sequels ever made, period. Maybe, actually, even one of the worst horror movies ever made. It is an absolute nightmare in all the wrong ways, and not in the way you think of when you think a horror movie should be. In the absolute worst sense. This is the guy that thought it would be a great idea if the fisherman from I Know What You Did Last Summer was like an undead creature like the Creeper from Jeepers Creepers. this is that guy. So great, awesome. But when they're first watching the video and they're like summoning him, there is something. I feel like there's something there. It does feel very familiar. It does feel like they're watching the tape from The Ring and stuff like that. But there's still something like weirdly atmospheric about it, and that sounded like the bells tolling and knowing that what that means. There is something kind of creepy there. Like I said, despite the fact that it feels like, you know, an off-brand version of The Ring or whatever. And then there's even those moments that could have worked when they're watching, once again, maybe like Sinister, where they're watching like the tapes of like actually showing the children being taken and he's like there and shit. But it does not take them long to ruin that at all. Like I said, when the movie's at its best, it's copying other movies. I don't know what that says, but here we are. So they do, basically, when you talk about setting up atmosphere, you talk about maybe like a creepy location or something that just seems slightly off or whatever. To use Hereditary as another example, where the whole movie just sort of felt like just something was just totally off tilt about it, from the way everybody interacted to the events that happened. It just seemed like something was really off the whole time. Well, to get atmospheric and set a creepy atmosphere, they just have the kids take a field trip to a cemetery. Yeah, just surround them with graves. That's just do the easiest possible thing to be like, isn't this setting creepy? Isn't this like totally weirding you out right now? But the thing here is that what I was talking about, that creepy stuff that was in like them watching the tape and stuff like that. But the thing here is that what was once effective completely goes to shit, because they kind of start showing that stuff again when one of the girls starts to see that shit while she's at the cemetery. And you know what it reminded me of? I'm not even exaggerating. It felt like an Ed Wood technique. You know, remember, like how Glen or Glenda is one of the most notoriously awful movies in movie history by the worst director of all time, Ed Wood, where it just seemed like random stock footage was stuffed into the movie in just random places. That's what it feels like is happening in the scene. It feels like it has literally reached Ed Wood levels of filmmaking. And that's something you haven't seen in a long time. I suppose you could say that. But yeah, Always Know What You Did Last Summer had a similar feel as that too. Like I was having flashbacks of it, and that's when it like occurred to me. Oh yeah, I actually forgot for a second. This is the same director, but his shittiness, his very familiar shittiness, actually reminded me that it was him. He actually has signature shittiness to where when his movie does something fucking stupid, you can tell who it is. I don't know how many directors you can say that about, but this guy has it. So I guess good for him. Um, but it's also it does feel like there's a bit missing too, because there are a couple of moments, like one in the middle here and then one towards the end, where they're like, well, I guess actually it's more towards the beginning, but the girl that disappears, where it's like she kind of the reason we know that she's, you know, fucked up by this is that scene in the cemetery where she's just staring off into the woods having those Ed Wood flashes or whatever. And then it turns out that she was leading like some double life, and she was like going way into the whole Slender Man thing on the internet, talking to people and shit. And it's like we just don't get this vibe at all from her before until she's already disappeared, and we've gotten to know the character for like the first 15 minutes or so of the movie. Yeah, much like the Meg, it spends a weird amount of time building up the characters before anything happens. Only except in the Meg, something eventually happened. Uh, but we also have moments when, like towards the end, when Joey King starts to grab like one of the other girl's sister and like pulls her into this world, but it's like we just sort of see it in footage at the very last minute. There's like 10 or 15 minutes of the movie left at this point, and it's like, oh, by the way, Joey King has been doing this whole teaching another one of the girls about the whole situation, taking her out in the woods and shit. Once again, seems totally not within the character that we've gotten to know, but alright. And as far as me saying it feels like things are missing, there was like an outlet that put out an article about this movie that said like they tried to make it sound like something that it's not actually. Because the article was claiming that the movie is so bad that it was released incomplete. They're basically trying to give it the Snowman's narrative, and say like they hadn't really even completed it. They just kind of threw it out into theaters. But apparently their argument was that there's scenes in the trailer that aren't in the movie. And to my understanding, it was like more gruesome scenes that actually showed like the end to a lot of characters that clearly were probably cut either for the rating or to not, you know, seem like they were messing with what happened in real life and stuff like that. So like, it's sort of like, yeah. But that's stuff is there's just since the beginning of time, trailers have had footage that's not in the movie, and I don't think that just seemed more almost like a smear thing, almost like to basically kick this movie while it was down, to get on the bandwagon of, oh my god, isn't Slender Man one of the worst movies ever made? It's like, it's certainly a dreadful bottom of the barrel movie, but I mean, if it's one of the worst movies you've ever seen, well, you're a very lucky person, so there's that. But anyway, enough defending the movie. So, what else happens here is, it's that thing I was talking about where it just feels like children trying to scare other children is what the writing of this movie feels like. Because especially when you look at when they're talking to that girl that the girl that disappeared was supposedly talking to online, and she's saying what you have to do, and she's like, you have to make a sacrifice to him, and him is in all caps, and it's like, this doesn't feel like, you know, some because authenticity you have to bring in a little bit into it because that's where the fear is going to come from, but this literally feels like a child writing their own horror story, and this is the way they would do it, the way they would try to build up this character, but it's obviously it's not working. But then there are also some scenes that feel like they're from an entirely different movie. When I was talking about how there's a strange amount of build-up before something happens, I guess. The whole thing where there's like this almost subplot where the girl that disappeared has like an alcoholic dad, and one of the first scares of the movie is them hearing, you know, a sound in the house, and this dude is like broken into the house and he's looking for his daughter, and it's like this weird sort of almost like a Lifetime movie moment or something of this drunk dude just looking for his missing daughter and all that, and then he has to be taken away by the cops, and it's like what movie was this again? I don't know, but then as it goes on, there is also it's if you want to talk about the scares it comes up with, there's him standing in the bushes. There's 1 minute one guy looks normal, in the next scene he's like doing the jerky PG-13 horror movie thing, whatever that is that so many of them do. I don't think any horror director even knows what that is. It's just like, well, all the other horror movies do that. Let's just do that thing. Because I guess it's supposedly scary or something. I don't know. But then there's the moment when he like grabs Joey King's face and like gives her the Madonna's no face mask from Dick Tracy or something. And that once again amounts to nothing, like most things in this movie. But then there's also the times where we actually see him. And usually this is going to be when a movie falls apart, when it just flat out shows you its monster. But I mean, once we sort of get one glimpse of him, even if it's just a picture, that's really what we've got. Whether he's moving, whether he's a giant spider, yeah, whether he's anything, he just sort of looks the same. And it's a thing where it's kind of surprising that this broke out in popularity at all, because it's such a generic-looking figure that there's really nothing you can do with it. Like, I don't know how this was supposed to succeed as a movie with this sort of monster. And so it feels like, I've talked about the whole it feels like nothing happens in this movie thing. Even when we're seeing him, and he's popping out and shit, it still kind of feels like nothing's happening. Because he just pops up, he's the generic figure, and then usually the scenes just end. And then we go off that. So, I don't know. And it does like these sort of YouTube effects where it like slowly zooms in. It sort of looks like the film, or I guess it's not film anymore, but the projector is like fucking up or something. But no, that's just what the movie looks like. Those are the scare moments, you understand. That's, I don't know. I really don't know. But then, what was actually quite interesting was that the movie was so mundane and so, directionless, nothing happening, was actually saving it from being like a jump scare movie, which sort of seemed like it was tailor-made to be. So that was a little surprising for a while. The jump scares do find their way in every now and then. Most notably, well, there's the whole one scene where the guy suddenly turns into him and hilarity ensues, but there's also, it goes into the thing where somebody will be sitting in just a quiet room, and just one person walking through the frame like that causes the soundtrack to assault us for a second. So you deal with that every now and then, but for the most part, surprisingly, with the exception of like those few moments, it's so lame and dull, it's not even a jump scare movie either. It's just kind of nothing. So, yeah. And it eventually gets into places where, like, even the characters stop caring. Like, they've, like, summoned this demon out of the internet, and, like, their friends are, like, disappearing, and shit's getting really weird. Joey King's losing her face or something. But, the one girl is, like, the most worried about her date with this dude. And then Joey King is, like, really pissed off because of this date with this dude. And it's, I don't know, what the fuck is this? And Joey King, of course, it's like, it's unfortunate for her. It's because it seems like, because she was in The Conjuring at a young age, and now it's like she's forever trying to be in a horror movie as good as The Conjuring again. Like, she tried with Wish Upon, now she's trying with this. And I don't know how much longer she's going to try, but if it's going to get progressively worse each time, then I can't even imagine what's after this. I don't know. So, yeah. So, and eventually, obviously, this is going to lead to no conclusion whatsoever. But the thing about that is that there is potential there, because you can totally make a horror movie totally scary, by giving it no conclusion. Like, look at the original Black Christmas, when we never fucking find out who the dude was, and it just stops. And, like, you can totally make no conclusion to a horror movie, like, really scary. But this is just, like, it's just like it decided to stop. It's like, it almost feels like it's still in mid, even though we've gotten to where we are with the characters, it somehow still feels like we just kind of stopped in mid-movie. Like, it just had nothing else to do. Because it was just that creatively bankrupt. And honestly, that's not hard to buy. That's, we'll just say maybe they literally ran out of ideas, so they didn't even write an ending, they just stopped writing. Oh, that would be, I almost want that to be the case. That would be fucking hilarious. So, we'll say that's what happened. We'll make that canon. Why not? So, yeah. There we go. That's what that was. That's all that is. So, like I said, if you want it to be like one of the worst movies ever or something like that, there's gotta be more to it. It can't be something as, pointless as this. If you want to see, like, the worst movie ever made, you gotta, like, it's way beyond this. There are much more interesting things that would qualify for the worst movie you've ever seen, I promise. So, let's take a weirdly dramatic turn into musicals again. Let's go into Mamma Mia. Here we go again, because of course that's what the title is. And I was surprised. It feels just like yesterday that they announced this. It's weird that it's like already here, and it's already been here. I'm like way late seeing it. It came out with The Equalizer. So, I wasn't quite sure what they were going to do, but I just knew that the entire cast was back, which was a good start. But the thing here is, what they were going to do with the story seemed quite surprising. Because they do the whole thing where it's, for starters, the writer-director, I think, actually said specifically, I want it to be The Godfather 2. In the sense that he wants it to go forward in the story, but we also see what happened before the first one, when everything led up to everything. So that's, to his credit, I mean, he did Godfather 2, this movie. That's exactly the layout, in pretty much the same fashion that Godfather 2 did. It's weirdly enough. But the really interesting choice that he made here was the idea of killing Meryl Streep's character immediately. Much like Vito, she's not alive to see what comes afterwards. But the thing was you hear that, and you know that she's in the movie, at least for a scene, because she's still in the credits and on the poster and everything. So what your thought process probably is, gee, I wonder what she was busy doing. Maybe it was, season 2 of Big Little Lies or something, or whatever other movies she's been doing. But no, according to the writer-director, it was always, from the get-go, the plan that she would be dead when the movie started, whether she was available or not. And that's very interesting to, like, actually start there and say, this is where this will be our starting point. And you can tell that it wasn't just some production problem. It was like, this movie is headed towards like a really emotional conclusion that would have needed to have happened, where that needs to be our starting point. But her scene in the movie is not shoehorned in at all, and it actually has this big impact. But I'm getting a bit ahead. So, there was the odd thing of like a sort of continuity error, if you're at all concerned about the continuity of the Mamma Mia movies. My memory, I saw the first one at least a couple of times, so my memory is kind of vague, but if I remember correctly, there is a scene where she, like, comically remembers them from the past when she sees them for the first time. And it looks like, Colin Firth and Pierce Brosnan and Stellan Skarsgård basically looking like goofy, younger versions of themselves, however they were dressed or whatever it was. So it seems like a bit of a weird continuity thing when we see their younger selves, and they're obviously played by much younger actors. But once again, doesn't matter, really. So, going in, there is kind of an odd case of intros here, if I have to get nitpicky, I guess, to where we have well, obviously we're cutting back and forth between present day and the past, and it's sort of this weird introduction to the three guys, because you would maybe expect it to be one, then the other, or whatever, but we're introduced to young Colin Firth, then we're introduced to current Pierce Brosnan, then we're introduced to young Stellan Skarsgård, and then the rest of them just kind of find their way in eventually. That seemed kind of odd, sort of, but also kind of an interesting way to do the jumping back and forth. To kind of, there's still kind of like a consistency in what we're seeing, whether it's jumping around in storylines or not. But the way the characters are introduced is still probably in the order they would have been, just not necessarily in the timeline they would have been. I don't know if that much thought was put into that or not, but I just found it quite odd at first, but then sort of satisfying the more it played out. So there is that, and of course, talking about the cast, we do start with Pierce Brosnan, and in his first scene, he does get to sing, and I know that was like one of the big, critical things about the first movie, was that people really did not like hearing Pierce Brosnan sing. Well, I'm one of the few people in the world that will defend Russell Crowe and Les Mis, so take that for what you will when I say this. I mean, yeah, it's certainly, it's not something you expect Pierce Brosnan to do, is sing, but, still, this particular scene, I think actually works, because he doesn't have to do, like, anything big with his voice, and it's like a really sort of soft, melancholy scene, where he's remembering Streep's character, and it's actually kind of nice and kind of sad, and just sort of, he's able to carry that just fine, and I'm sure people will just immediately jump all over it and say it's like the worst thing ever, but I feel like it really worked for this scene, and that was fun. I wasn't like all over him in the first movie either. It was like, whatever. It's like, I'm not the best judge of that sort of thing, so whatever. And then there's Colin Firth. And the really interesting thing about that is, I was really interested to watch Colin Firth in this movie in particular, because ever since the first one came out, he's been quite vocal about how much he actually loved doing the first movie, and how he, like, thinks it's like one of the most underrated of his movies. So when you actually watch him in this, it is really kind of fun to see Colin Firth doing a movie like this, but not only that, but knowing how much he loves doing it. And that does kind of come through. I wish he had more screen time than he does in this. But yeah, we do spend most of our time in the past, it feels like. So, but they do come in, because we also have Stellan Skarsgård coming back as well. And he gets to do this, comedic little thing where he plays like his overweight twin brother, and then his other character. He has an amusing scene with Ahmed Jalili where he's like being told to his face that he ages poorly, and he just kind of has to take it in this amusing way. And then hear about how, great looking Colin Firth is and stuff like that. It is very funny stuff. And as far as these younger characters go, there are like Lily James. I have not exactly been the president of the Lily James fan club, but I had heard many things about how great she was in this, and yeah, she is surprisingly appealing, especially having the giant task of playing young Meryl Streep. She's still not an actress I'm like totally in love with, but I do buy her in this part for the most part. And then there is I do think that the young Colin Firth and the young Brosnan were a bit too, they looked a little too much alike for them to be sort of shuffled around, but the young Stellan Skarsgård is very interesting because, first off, a big thanks to them for actually seeking out like a real casting choice and not just going with one of his 8 kids or however many it is. But despite that, he's this guy who I'm assuming is not related, still very much looks like he's in that Skarsgård family. It's a little weird, but definitely works with him. Like he's one of those where like as soon as you see him, you know which character he's playing, even if you're like totally and completely unfamiliar with the actor. Like I think I am, so. But then we also have the very welcome return of Christine Baranski and Julie Walters, as well as their young counterparts who are also perfectly cast. Once again, like, if you didn't even know right away the second you saw them, you know who they're playing. And of course, they're always great. Christine Baranski is, like, the only actress in the world that could deliver the line, be still my beating vagina when she sees Andy Garcia, and somehow make it work. I feel like I'm gonna just stick to the fact that she's the only actress that could have made that line work. And of course, on top of them, we do have an array of new characters like Andy Garcia and Cher, most notably, who unfortunately are barely here. Cher certainly has a big presence, as we all know, but there is something very bizarre about her here. Like when she reads her lines, like when she's performing, she's fine, of course. But when she's like saying lines, and remember, this is the Oscar-winning star of Moonstruck and Silkwood and all that other stuff, Mask. But you can tell she's a little out of practice with line delivery, because she's just like, there are these really bizarre pauses, and it's sort of like when you watch Saturday Night Live and you can see like the host like reading the cue cards just directly in the middle of the scene. It sort of feels like that. So that's kind of really off-putting in kind of a sucky way when it's kind of, there's been so much build up to the fact that, you know, that's basically, you spend the whole movie, not just the character, but the actress, you're like, Cher's coming, like, somewhere in this movie Cher is coming. And, like, the whole movie feels like that, and that's what happens when she appears, and it's, and at least something to be desired, but at least she can still perform, so there's that. And then there is the Amajalila character. It has apparently been a big hit, and and yeah, just the fact that he can just play this one character, like never leaves this one place, and still have all those comedic moments is really good stuff. So he's been around a long time too, and has been the comic relief in many movies. So that's always great to see. And as far as like the numbers go, and that's important to this movie because this movie is like 98% musical numbers. Yeah, the choreography is like really just incredibly lively, and it somehow manages to never really lose its energy, whether they're going, because most of the time, like every now and then there's a melancholy one or there's like a more emotional song, but most of the time the numbers are like really big. So the fact that they're able to do that, but also the sort of ballsy choice to repeat songs from the first movie in a different context. I sort of wish Lay All Your Love on Me would have gotten another shot, given the not so great number that they got in the first movie, yet being such an incredible song, but it's still, what they do go with here still definitely works, and like I said, has just as much, if not more, impact in this new context that these songs find themselves in. So that's great. And I think not all of them are the same ones used, but a decent number of them are returning ones. But still, the fact that they were able to keep it up even despite that is really good. So, and visually, it's rather nice. There's a couple of transitions that are kind of inspired, like when like an ocean turns into a postcard, or when her and young Firth are walking and then it like turns into a painting that's in another scene. Stuff like that works as well, but then it gets into like the conflict area, like when she learns that Brosnan's character has a fiance after they've, you know, fallen in love or whatever, and this is kind of like where it gets a little hard to buy, because it's like, I know being a fiance is a bit different than just being able to sort of, you know, hop around freely with, you know, these guys that aren't attached to anything or whatever, and she's not attached to anything or whatever. But even so, it did seem a bit odd to see that the big conflict, one of the big conflicts in this movie, is this girl getting mad at this dude that's already previously attached to somebody else after they've fallen in love, despite the fact that this is the third guy she's fallen in love with in like the last half hour. So, because there's always, like, she falls in love with young Firth, and then there's, like, this accidental circumstance, and then voila, she's just met and is now in love with young Skarsgård, and then came young Brosnan. But it's a problem when he's attached to somebody else, despite the fact that she's just fallen in love 2 more times, very, very recently, with no closure yet. So, that seemed a bit, sort of, like, I guess a very forced conflict. Like, if they were going to have a conflict here, they probably could have picked a better one than that. So that was kind of unfortunate. But even so, once again, in a movie like this, it seems like it's hardly the point. Once again, given the fact that 98% of this movie is the musical numbers, and we know where these scenes are going to end up anyway. So, yeah, and it does have, if there's one sort of major problem that it does have, it's the fact that, despite what I just said about those flashback scenes, the present day stuff is like, there's not really a whole lot to do here. Like I talked about, Andy Garcia and Cher being like new characters, and they're new characters in the current world, the current setting. But there's just so little going on in this section that they just have nothing to do, and neither do any of the other characters really. Dominic Cooper spends most of the movie in a completely different place, and just the whole thing of whether he shows up eventually or not. And we know he will, so it doesn't matter. But so there's definitely a lot more going on of worth in the flashback scenes, and the numbers as well in particular. And it's just the present day stuff just accomplishes so little at a time that you kind of start to wonder if it's even going to go anywhere, really. And the jumping around can sometimes feel a bit, on the nose, like how the storms happen at the same time. There's another big story development that happens at the same time and all that, but but it also does sort of like, that seems like it's kind of the point that these stories have to, they're like parallel but also sort of intersecting at the same time, at least with the same events, so there's something kind of nice about that also. And like I said, just leading to this really emotionally impactful ending that makes you say, forget all the bad stuff I said before, this is something worth seeing. So, yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's, as somebody who thought the first movie was fine, I also think this one is just fine. So, yeah, and I know, like, some people, like, absolutely adore it. I know some people don't adore it, but yeah, I think it's fine. I think both of them are very, they certainly have that enjoyable quality about them, and I'll probably see this one again just as I at some point saw the first one again. Actually, I may have even seen the first one 3 times. I don't remember, but it's fine. So there's that. So let's end on The Darkest Minds. I don't know how much there is to really say about this, but we'll try. It does start off with this very silly opening scene that once again sort of immediately makes you realize you're in some dire circumstance having to watch this movie. And it's like, she does have this very Slender Man style death. I mean that by Slender Man, the movie style death, the one we just talked about, where she like convulses or whatever and then is just dead for some reason. And this is our introduction, so it's one of those cases where just hearing the concept, you know right away it's one of those young adult fiction novels that take place in like a really bleak future, and it's children with powers who get separated into different sections, and we're trying not to fall asleep as we describe this. I didn't quite know what it was when I went in, like, at all. I was expecting something sort of like The Fifth Wave, so I was already pessimistic anyway. But yeah, it was even more predictable than I thought it would be, so. And of course, you've got, with like the children with powers and stuff like that, and that sort of sci-fi feel. Yes, this movie just happens to have Sean Levy's name on it, and yes, Sean Levy's name just happens to also be on Stranger Things. So you know they desperately, desperately wanted to put Stranger Things' title on this movie poster in letters just as big as the ones that say The Darkest Minds. He also did Arrival. Now, I understand that Sean Levy seems to do his job quite well. Like, he directed, like, Big Fat Liar, which is great and everything, but he's obviously got these 2 big titles to his name now, Stranger Things and Arrival. But just take a gander at the rest of Sean Levy's filmography, and you'll see how The Darkest Minds is not exactly from out of nowhere, like some, small bump. It was actually Stranger Things and Arrival that were, and I don't even think Stranger Things is all that, honestly. But if you want to look at, like, Arrival, and I guess that, it's more like he's just reached this very sudden peak. Even scoring an Oscar nomination for Arrival, but no, this is actually fairly normal. So don't let those names fool you on the poster, is what I'm trying to say. So, As it goes on, we learn that she has a particular power, and the way they're split up by their power, and she's apparently an orange, where she has like memory control and shit, or mind control or whatever. She can do the Jedi mind trick basically, and they play that up a lot, shamelessly as if it's their own thing. So even the wording of it, where she says like, you know, no, he says like, you're gonna do this, and she says, no, you're going to do this, and he repeats it back to her, no, I will do this, and walks away. It's the fucking Jedi mind trick, and they're not even trying to hide it. But then, and she can also like see memories for some reason. It's like they kind of make up her powers as they go. So what's going on here is that this apparently puts her in the orange group. They're separated by color, and I guess oranges and reds are like so dangerous they're either taken off and like put in some kind of quarantine, or they're taken off and killed. So she tricks them into thinking she's a green, so they won't do that. But then somehow Mandy Moore... Yeah, Mandy Moore's in this for some reason, very briefly. Like, in this section, and then, like, the very end. And any actor that's in this that's not a child is, or at least a late teenager, is basically in it once or twice. So, it's that kind of movie. So... And then she eventually gets on the run, and she runs into, what you know it, the good-looking guy, the silent girl with the really powerful powers, and the sarcastic nerd. The good-looking guy is Harris Dickinson from Beach Rats. After I saw Beach Rats, if I were to guess the next movie I would see Harris Dickinson in, never would have guessed this one. So, but of course he's got to be the guy that she kind of falls in love with, she kind of has a romance with, all that shit. And he's a guy that can, like, like, he can crack concrete, and he can, like, throw trees and shit, like, uprooting them. But he can also, like, change tires and, like, split up food. And it's take a while to guess which one he does more than the other in a movie this mundane. So, and once again, you also have the sarcastic nerd character. The sarcastic nerd character who apparently doesn't know what Coke bottle glasses are, because he is wearing regular glasses that are not round whatsoever, yet claims to be wearing Coke bottle glasses because that's a nerd trait, I guess. No. So, and they're being chased by quite a few people, the military, of course, as always, but also, once again, very briefly, irritatingly briefly, Gwendolyn Christie. And you know she's real bad because when she's chasing him in her car, she, like, bobs her head while she's driving. It's hilarious. But the thing about it is, once again, taken care of very quickly. It's like the fanboys that are still pissed off that John Boyega knocked her into a fiery death. How about just stealing the end of X-Men Origins? Yeah. Okay. The Jedi mind trick is one thing, okay, because Star Wars is one thing. But no, X-Men Origins is what they take from now. Remember at the end with Stryker, when it's like, just keep walking until you wear out and then keep walking. When they write this, do they not even realize what they're doing? Like, if maybe you, like, you know, borrow something from a movie and you see it's a little too much like that movie, so you whittle it down a little bit until you've made it your own thing, slightly inspired by something else. But it's like this movie just kind of takes the stuff and then just leaves it that way, forgetting to whittle it down into their own thing. They just take it. And they just move on. It's like they get stuck and they don't know what to do, and they must desperately move on to the next scene, so they cheat, and they take, and they move on. And it just feels really, really lazy and so shameless. Like, really, really shameless. Like, they don't give a fuck at all. And then, talking about, like, them being chased by her and shit for, like, one scene. Yeah, the chase scene is not that bad. Only problem is you'll realize I'm speaking in singular terms. The chase scene. Once we establish, hey, that wasn't a bad action scene, this movie abandons action entirely until the very end, where we have the overlong, fiery climax. Actually, it's not necessarily the climax that's overlong, it's the whole... Once the climax is done, the movie has like 15 minutes left to try to build itself up like it's going to be a franchise it's never going to get. So we have to deal with that. We have to watch this movie have such optimism for where it's going to go. But we've seen its box office placement. We know exactly where this is going to go. And that's right to the end credits that we saw. So, the end. Um, but yeah, and in between that, we do have these very flat character interactions. Like I said, we have the scene where she, dances with him. She may or may not fall in love with him or whatever. Feels very forced, very sudden. The sarcastic nerd gets to be the sarcastic nerd. They eventually meet up with one dude. These interactions feel so disjointed. There's this really bizarre montage where they've met this dude at this certain destination, and it's like a montage of them like interacting and him telling them stuff and stuff like that. His voiceover over them doing stuff. And it's this really weird moment where I guess they're supposed to be happy. But what it is she's like sort of half smiling, like she's shy. And sitting directly across from her while she's like that, this dude is laughing hysterically like he's heard the funniest fucking joke in the entire universe. And it looks like he's like descending into madness in front of her. But I think it's just supposed to show they're happy hanging out with each other. It was weird and kind of creepy, actually. So yeah, and that's basically what we do. There is, like I said, I was talking about the adult actors, I guess you could call them, but there's also, I mentioned like Mandy Moore and Gwendolyn Christie. If you want to talk, like, there's always like at least one veteran actor in these movies. The veteran actor in this movie is Bradley Whitford, directly off the set of Get Out. I can tell because he's still wearing the glasses and he has the beard, all white. And the problem here is that he's in the opening scene, and he's never seen again. He's referenced again in one line of dialogue, despite the fact that he plays the fucking president. But the thing about it is we do see him one more time later, but it's clearly just the same footage from the first scene. So, very embarrassing. And that's eventually what we lead to, and then basically we realize it's really just trying to be 28 days later. Because you've got something horrible happening to the population. It's trouble if you walk into a convenience store. Don't trust the military, and that destination, that safe destination that you're trying to get to, not safe. Not near as safe as you think it's going to be. So, and that's it. They just sort of lift and they steal, and anything that they don't is just very mundane bullshit with very boring, predictable characters. The end. I'm amazed I can say that much about it, because it's, what else is there even to this? So, yes. That's going to be it for these. Next week, I think I already have mapped out. I know Crazy Rich Asians is probably going to be, like, really popular or something. But I do want to do some catch-up. I do absolutely, like, my top priority is Mile 22, of course. But I'm going to try to also catch up on Teen Titans Go to the Movies and Spy Who Dumped Me, if only for Kate McKinnon. And I think, as of today, Action Point is on digital, so I'm probably going to look into that as well. So that'll probably be what Friday is, unless there's like a change of plan. So, and yeah, and the verses will be whatever the hell it is. So, so yeah, until all that stuff, that's it.